Greetings from our Middle Tennessee studio. Welcome to today's Vista Points podcast, Choose Your Path, where the Vista Points staff are committed to improving the quality of life for people of any age who are living with a physical, mental, or intellectual disability. I'm Bart, your podcast host. We continue our journey through this podcast of discovering and using special needs trust in a variety of ways. Our journey takes us to East Tennessee today to Case Management and Caregiving Company. It's so nice when we have a local company join us. Today, joining us in the studio, we have Angie Jones, the Client Services Coordinator for Care Around the Block. This organization provides services in the East Tennessee area. They have two offices, one in Knoxville and one in Von Orr. In reviewing the company's website, I found their catchphrase. This phrase really falls into Vista Points' realm. The phrase is, "We promise to make your life easier." Vista Points also wants to make its beneficiaries' lives easier by helping them live a good quality of life. I think all of our listeners are going to enjoy today's podcast with Angie Jones. Hello, Angie. Welcome to our Vista Points podcast.
Hi, Bart. Thank you for having me on your podcast today.
Angie, being a client services coordinator is probably a difficult and rewarding position. How did you get started in this business?
Well, it's a long story, so I'm going to try and make it as short as I can. So in my previous life, I worked in the corporate world as a training and development manager back in England. You probably can tell I have a bit of an accent. I emigrated into the US in 2004 and was raised in a young family. My children attended a Mother's Day Out program, and in the same building was an adult day centre which welcomed seniors living with dementia as a way to provide respite for their caregivers. So back then I was young and naive and thought, wow, they could really use my help, and I knew I could make a difference in their lives. Well, I think it took me about 30 minutes for me to realise that this community was going to give me so much more than I could ever give them. I was inspired by the staff and the participants. So my journey began. I went back to school at the age of 43 and attained occupational therapy assistant certification. I knew I wanted to work in a non-traditional role, and straight out of school, I went to work for the Office on Aging here in Knoxville. And I was their program coordinator, serving the senior centre and adult day centre there. Then in 2021, I joined Care Around the Block as the program manager, and I oversaw their dementia program, which is called Embrace. I found myself right where I was supposed to be, and I've never looked back.
That's interesting, Angie. Working for a care management and caregiving company really puts you in touch with a variety of people and their families. We know that families can be very passionate when wanting something for their family member. Does your company work with the entire family, or is one family member usually the person you interact with?
If our clients are fortunate enough to have a family, there is typically one leader in that family. However, the extent of involvement with the whole family can vary based on specific situation and needs of the client. In many cases, we are working with the entire family to provide comprehensive support.
Thanks, Angie. What are some general things that families or clients ask for in the way of care management? Do they usually know exactly what they need, or does your company do an assessment to determine what is needed?
So care management covers a wide variety of services, and it's very client-centered and individualized. Clients and families often come to us in crisis looking for support and answers. We start by completing a thorough assessment of the client and their care team. Once that assessment is complete and areas of concern are identified, we will sit down with the client, family, care team, and review our recommendations and develop a plan to move forward. We recently had a call from a trust company on a mutual client that we'd worked with for several years ago. She had transitioned into an assisted living and was doing well until one day she became very terribly upset and wanted to leave that facility. The family tried to resolve that, but the client was adamant that she wanted to return home. At this point, we were no longer involved in that case. And on returning home, the client started to have falls and mismanaged medication and was ultimately and unfortunately hospitalized. The trust company reached out again for us to help, and we were able to complete a full assessment while the client was still in rehab. We identified the goals of the client and the family and were then able to provide a report with recommendations. We identify areas of concern and offer solutions. The client really wanted to discharge to her own home and age in place. Good news is she's now home with 24-hour caregivers and thriving. She's safe, taking her medications, no more falls, and is joyful.
Wow, that's a good story, Angie. Care around the block really has two sides to it as we see it, care management and caregiving. And I think you mentioned you also work with clients who have dementia or Alzheimer's disease.
Absolutely, Bart. We have a large percentage of clients living with dementia or Alzheimer's. Did you know that there are over 100 types of dementia? We often joke and say, if you have worked with one client with dementia, you have worked with one client with dementia. I like to use the analogy of our clients who are living with dementia or Alzheimer's as being like snowflakes. Each one has a unique set of symptoms. While they all have similarities, they often present very differently. So when caring for those living with dementia, it's all about approach. We here at Care Around the Block pride ourselves in meeting clients wherever they are on their journey, meeting them where they are and coming alongside them. We have clients that range from being on standby to requiring total care.
I'm so glad your company is there for people who are living with dementia and Alzheimer's. Speaking from a personal level, I have Alzheimer's. And if it's diagnosed early, like mine was, it doesn't stop a person from living their life. People like me can go on do things like they always have, but maybe they need a little help. Some of the help can be people's activities or daily living. Would you explain exactly what that means?
Yeah, sure. So activities of daily living, or sometimes it's known as ADLs, they'll shorten that. They are called those skills required to manage one's basic physical needs, including personal hygiene or grooming, dressing, toileting, transferring or ambulating and eating. Our caregivers will come alongside our clients and assist with such things as this. So let's take a couple of examples. So for dressing, our caregivers will encourage choice in the selection of clothes. You know, they won't take that independence away from our clients. Grooming, so they allow them to groom themselves, provide the tools if they're needed, monitor the progress and provide assistance. Eating, so they'll ask for food preferences. They'll ask for that person to help them with meal preparation and meal setup and not just do for them. Bathing, so give a choice as to when and where and what type of bathing that client wants. And then toileting, so encouraging fluids, even though that may cause more visits to the bathroom, you know, we want to always make sure that we're working alongside the client.
I understand that. Vista Points does wonders with working with its beneficiaries to secure the best care possible. The company wants people to continue to live a good life or even a better life. It's also good that their individual special needs trust can pay for the care management or non-medical home care. They want the beneficiaries to be as independent as possible. Your company website states that your care managers detect issues, predict events, and prevent possible serious problems. How are your care managers able to do that?
Bart, let me share a real life example with you. So we have a client who lives in a memory care assisted living facility. About a year ago, the client had fallen, and instead of the staff at the facility reaching out to us, they decided to contact the son, who, by the way, is a very busy professional and hired us to take care of issues such as this. Anyway, so the facility sends the client off to the emergency room, and the son, trying to be a good son, meets his father at the hospital. No x-rays were done. They checked that he could basically just move his arms and legs and then shipped him right back to the facility. Well, unfortunately, a few hours later, he fell again. The son this time called our care manager and she met him at the hospital. She was able to advocate for x-rays. By the way, they would only do hip x-rays because that's where the pain was coming from. And the x-rays came back clear. The doctor offered pain meds and wanted to send him home again. Our care manager advocated again, saying that this was not our client's typical baseline and pushed for a spinal x-ray. Well, with pushback and a lot of resentment, those x-rays were completed and they showed several vertebrae fractures. He was admitted, then discharged to rehab for several weeks, and a year later, he is back to his baseline and thriving. No falls, no hospitalizations.
That's a great story, Angie. I'm glad your caregivers have this kind of training. As you know, Vista Points works with people of any age who are living with a physical, mental, or intellectual disability. Have you worked with someone who's not a senior citizen but that has a disability? And how are you able to help this person?
Yeah, so Care Around the Block has been fortunate to work with many wonderful people of all ages over the years. We have cared for younger individuals living with traumatic brain injuries, spina bifida, autism, bipolar, schizophrenia, and many other disabilities. The case I'm most proud of was a young man that was injured in a car accident when he was about 7 years old. His mother and grandparents were misusing the funds from his settlement, and over the course of several years, we helped get him emancipated from his mother and found a local attorney that agreed to be his long-term conservator. We transitioned him to a group home where he continues to live with other individuals his age and be as involved in the community as much as possible. He is thriving. We help give families peace of mind that their adult children with disabilities will continue to be cared for even after they pass away.
This is so helpful, Angie. Now, I know you must keep everybody's business confidential, but now that we know the facts about the types of services you provide, will you share another story of a client that stands out in your mind? Our listeners really enjoy those feel-good stories.
Well, I'll try not to get emotional with this one, Bart, but the one that really stands out, she was actually a new client that had been referred to us by the Office on Aging. She had very little funds, no family or friends. It was actually a volunteer from the Mobile Meals who had reached out to the Office on Aging. He had concerns about this wonderful lady and the fact that she had no one. I was the one that went out to her home and completed the initial assessment. I remember walking up the steps and knocking on the door. It took her a little while to open the door, and she gingerly cracked the door. She lived in total darkness. She was malnourished and very anxious. It took me a little time to gain her trust and let me in. Her home was disorderly and floor to ceiling with absolutely everything from newspapers, trash to sticky notes. Sticky notes were all over the walls. She had not left her apartment in years. Oh, and by the way, she had lost 50 pounds in 12 months. I sat down and started with the question I always start with. What is important to you? She replied, I'm lonely and I feel invisible, even though I have lots of neighbours. I want to be around others who are like me. So after completing the assessment, I went through my recommendations, and clearly the main one was to transition her into an assisted living community where she would be with others and get the care she desperately needed. By the way, I should mention that she had not showered for probably close to a year. It was pitiful. She shook her head in disbelief when I told her that I could help her with this. And she replied, that is just a pipe dream and it will never happen. It was difficult to find a replacement because her income was low, but we did, and she moved this summer. I remember even on the day of the move, her grabbing the care manager's hand and just being terrified that it was still not going to happen. Long story short, we were able to get her into a wonderful community. We were able to give her recommendations and act on those recommendations. Today, she's thriving. She has her own little room in a wonderful community. Her weight has increased. She attends activities and is back to living a full life.
Wow, Angie. Thank you very much for sharing that story with me and our listeners. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Our listeners write us with questions about various topics. When it comes to people being discharged from the hospital, how can Care Around the Block help someone transition from the hospital or rehabilitation unit to their home? And is it terribly expensive?
So, Bart, anytime someone is transitioning from one level of care to another, such as discharge from the hospital, they are at risk. So here at Care Around the Block, we work with discharge teams and social workers to provide a seamless transition from hospital or rehab back home. We like to be prepared and will recommend a home visit before discharge so we can see any potential concerns or risks back at the home. And I know that you asked a question about it being expensive. So initially, we have to consider there probably would be an increase in costs at the beginning to just kind of get them home, get them set, but that usually evens out and wanes off. But that first initial period is very critical for it to be smooth. We have clients who have not had any kind of care. They've come home and they've fallen again or ended up back in the hospital. So we'd like to do a little bit heavier up front and then transition them, and then it evens out.
Okay, I'll remind our listeners once again that Vista Points Special Needs Trust can be used to pay for these benefits that you provide, Angie. And so, have you got one more story that you could share with us before we start concluding this podcast?
I've got a thought I'd like to share with you, Bart, if that's okay. You can probably tell I'm very, very passionate about my work.
Yes.
If there's one thing I've learned along my journey doing this type of work, it's that the most joyful and most fulfilled people are those who devote themselves to providing love and care to others. I love my job and I'm thankful every day for working with the most amazing clients.
Thank you, Angie, for sharing the information and for being on the Vista Points Choose Your Path podcast today. By providing our listeners with a range of examples and benefits of using care management and caregiving companies such as Care Around the Block, people can really be so much more independent than trying to manage it on their own. I know for our special needs trust beneficiaries, they're able to see how their trust money could be used to benefit their own lives. What you do is truly a blessing. Will you now, Angie, share with our listeners how Care Around the Block can be reached?
Yeah, Care Around the Block can be reached by phone at 865-444-6787, by email at jones, JONES, AM at carearoundtheblock.com. You can also find our company on the web at www.carearoundtheblock.com. That's carearoundtheblock.com.
Thank you, Angie. I think one of our listeners was off looking for a pencil. Would you give us that website and phone number again?
Yeah, sure, Bart. It's carearoundtheblock.com. And then our phone number is 865-444-6787.
Thanks again, Angie. I'm confident your information's encouraged at least one of our listeners to make the decision to give you a call. Thanks so much to our podcast listeners for tuning into today's episode of Choose Your Path, a Vista Points podcast. Don't forget to ask your questions. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to do so. You can ask your questions by calling the Vista Point office at 888-422-4076. That number again, 888-422-4076. Each of the Vista Points team is happy to answer your questions and assist you in any way that they can. You can find more information about Special Needs Trust for people of any age who are living with a physical, mental, or intellectual disability on our Facebook page, Vista Points Inc. That's Vista Points INC. I'm happy to say our podcasts have become an informative resource for so many people. You can subscribe to the Vista Points YouTube channel and be notified of the latest episodes as they go live, which is on the 1st and 15th of every month. The YouTube channel is named Vista Points SNT. That's SNT as in Special Needs Trust. You can also find past episodes on the Vista Points website at vistapoints.org. That's vistapoints.org. Just click on the podcast tab at the top of the page. It will take you to all of our podcasts. Enjoy your day with your loved one. Come back for more or look into past episodes of Choose Your Path. Regardless of where or when you find us, we walk beside you on the path. I look forward to sharing more information with you on how Special Needs Trust can be a benefit to anyone living with a disability. Cheers.